All right, my friends, we are back for chapter 23 of Book Scavenger. You know I'm excited. So Emily is just so focused on this Book Scavenger game, and poor James is kind of getting left in the dust a little bit because he has a bet with Maddie, the fungus queen or whatever it was. And I think he's really worried about his little tuft of hair Steve. So I don't know. We'll see. That seems like it's seeing some foreshadowing of issues here, so we'll see what happens in chapter 23. Here we go. Emily continued to puzzle over the number clue Friday and throughout the weekend. By Sunday morning, her attempts to make sense of it had amounted to nothing, and always floating around was James's question about whether the game had actually been finished before Mr. Griswold was attacked. The black cat clue had led them somewhere after all, but what if this number was now a dead end? It didn't help that the last time she'd checked the Book Scavenger forums, rumors were swirling that Mr. Griswold wasn't doing well. One user, Captain Overpants, interesting name, claimed to work in Mr. Griswold's hospital and said that Mr. Griswold was still in a coma and had been secretly moved to hospice care because he was dying. But then someone asked Captain Overpants if he could verify his claim, and he said no, and then a bunch of people started jumping on him for fanning the flames of rumors. The whole exchange was exhausting to follow. Emily clicked out of the forums and decided no news was just that, no news, and she wouldn't let any rumors get to her before she heard something real. But that was easier said than done. She couldn't shake her worry that Mr. Griswold might not recover and that she could lose not only Mr. Griswold, but Book Scavenger too. That afternoon, her family was going out to an outdoor concert at Golden Gate Park, which sounded like the perfect opportunity to get her mind off Mr. Griswold and his game. It also seemed like an ideal time to hide a book for Book Scavenger. James's dad was in town for that weekend, so Emily would be a solo scavenger. Funny how only 2 weeks ago she would have preferred it that way. To get an idea of where she might hide a book, Emily did an online search for images of the music concourse and discovered that there would be a fountain. She had once found a copy of Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's library hidden in an aquarium at her previous doctor's office, and ever since she had wanted to hide one underwater. This looked like the perfect opportunity. All she needed to do was pick a book and seal it in a waterproof bag. She'd saved the Book Scavenger sack the aquarium hider had used. She could buy them through the website, and this one was printed to look like the interior of an aquarium with its teal color and pieces of... I skipped a page. I don't know what happened. Wow, I skipped a lot of pages. Okay, let me start over. You could buy them through the website, and this one was printed to look like the interior of an aquarium with its teal colors and pieces of coral. Personally, Emily would have chosen the bag printed to make the book look like a treasure chest. The aquarium camouflage and a fountain wasn't ideal, but it would work. Now to decide which book to hide. It was always difficult to choose which of her books to give away. Her most favorites were marked up with hearts and exclamation marks and other reading notes in the margins, so she would never part with those. But she collected copies of those favorite books to give away. Rummaging through her hideable book collection, she decided on The Westing Game. When the cranes left for the concert, a murky white washed the sky. There were no views of the bay on this overcast day. They walked past the street Emily's school was on, and then walked further, stopping at a small market/deli to pick up sandwiches, and then walked further until they finally reached where her dad had last found street parking for Sal. "We should have just walked to the park," Matthew said as he climbed into the back. "We're practically there." "Only in San Francisco," their dad replied. Emily sat in the middle of the van and flipped open The Westing Game. She was in the middle of reading the bit where Turtle sneaks into the mansion on Halloween when Matthew bellowed, "Look! Look, 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 look!" He pounded his index finger against the glass with every look. He'd startled Emily so much that she'd almost dropped her book. She scanned the street trying to figure out what had gotten him so worked up. There was a bland brick building that looked more like a bank than anything else until she noticed the lit-up marquee that read, "The Fillmore." "I'll see you in a week," Matthew said to the building as they drove by. Matthew had found a group of friends from his school who were going to the Flush concert, so their parents had agreed to let him buy a ticket. If it were anyone else who had already befriended an entire group to go to a concert with, it might surprise Emily, but this was Matthew. "If we lived here, I'd work at the Fillmore," Matthew said. "If we lived here, I'd ride a cable car every day," their mom chimed in. This was one of their games they often played, imagining life, sometimes ridiculously, lived long-term in one place. If we lived here, my calves would become the size of small watermelons from walking so many hills, her dad said. Emily watched gray buildings whiz by. The clinging white mist made all the wires that crisscrossed the city stand out like a cat's cradle. Your turn, Emily, their dad said. If we lived here, I'd live above a bookstore, she said, thinking of the apartments above Hollister's. Oh, yes, her mom said. If only. And Emily wondered, why if only? If only implied, if only we could stay, and the idea of calling San Francisco home didn't sound so unreasonable to her. When they got to the music concourse, the jazz was already in full swing. Her parents hadn't realized this was the Halloween-themed concert, and the front benches were filled with zombies, witches, and fairies. Even the stage looked dressed in costume as something out of ancient Rome, with an ornate dome carved with angels and columns flanking either side. But Emily knew from photos that this was how it always looked. Tables and pop tents had been set up beyond the benches, under frizzy trees, their leaves lit with orange lanterns. They passed the large fountain with a statue where Emily wanted to hide her book and continue to an expanse of lawn. An upbeat, bouncy number played as the cranes wove in a single file line around the blankets and collapsible chairs, and a dancing toddler dressed like a monkey. Emily's dad put his hands on her mother's hips and pretended to do an embarrassing conga that was mostly shrugging shoulders and the occasional kick. Emily was relieved when they found a clear space of grass to shake out their blanket. Anyone hungry? Emily's mom sat down the bag of sandwiches. I'm going to hide my book, Emily said. Why don't you go with her, Matthew? Emily pretended to be very interested in adjusting the waterproof baggie around the Westing game. It had been a while since she and Matthew had hidden a book together. He used to be really into it, maybe even more than Emily in the beginning. They fought about it back then because he always wanted to hide his books in a way that made it super hard to find them, while Emily wanted her books found so she could read about their adventures as they traveled on to new places. Matthew dug into the paper bag and pulled out a prosciutto sandwich. Without so much as a glance or apologetic smile her way, he said, Nah, I'd rather go watch the guitarist. Emily knew her cheeks reddened. She could feel them get hot. It was stupid of her to care. She had known he wouldn't want to join her. All she was going to do was walk the book over to the fountain and drop it in anyway, so it's not like she needed a partner. But if it had been a few years ago, Matthew would have found a way to make something simple like that feel like a secret spy mission. Matthew, go with your sister, their mother said. You can get up close to the music afterward. That's okay, Emily said quickly. I'm not going far, and I'll be super quick. This one doesn't need 2 people anyway. Before anyone could say anything more, Emily hurried to the fountain. She added a small stone to the baggie to help weigh down the Westing game so it would stay underwater. When it seemed like nobody was paying attention to her, she dropped the book. With a sploosh, it went under. That night, when she got home, she would enter the clue onto the book Scavenger. She thought of a good one. Where the wet things are between art and science, encrypted in her and James's secret language to make it a little more difficult. Art and science referred to the De Young Museum and the Academy of Sciences, which were on either side of the concourse. She sat on the edge of the fountain for a minute. A Dorothy and a Cowardly Lion played checkers on their blanket. 3 small pirates held hands, streaking in circles until they fell down. She could see her family's blanket from there. Her parents were dancing a clumsy barefoot salsa on the grass. Matthew was nowhere to be seen, no doubt standing as close to the stage as he could manage. She looked down at the Westing game, still submerged at the bottom of the fountain. She wished James could have come with her tonight. He would have liked the whole hiding a book underwater thing. How odd that she could be a solo book hunter for years and enjoy it, but now it felt like something was missing to be on her own. Oh, that's what having a friend is like, Emily. And that is the end of chapter 23. So I will see you guys next time for chapter 24. Bye!